they're melodic, but they also, again, have kind of a message and a point to their music that I think, should never be lost.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the duty of an artist, like, otherwise just specifically become a poet. Like if you're rapping, right, it's rhythm and poetry. So you have to have the rhythm, you have to have the flow and the cadence and all these elements for it to be digestible, for people to want to hear what you have to say. So, however, though, the message is still important as well.
Yeah.
And I believe it was I think it was Rakim that said, like, once the melody and the beat like took over and that was pushed to the forefront, that's when hip hop kind of started changing, in his opinion, for the worse, is when the message became less important and the forefront became the beat.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of The Conscious Endeavor. We're here talking about consciousness, self, reality, all the really cool stuff. I'm Daniel Martin, your host. I'm here with MysterE.
Yes.
A little play on words, a literary man, a lyricist, rapper, event facilitator, educator, a man of many hats,
yes, sir.
like myself. Sir. So welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, you've been doing a lot of things. I've had the pleasure of playing for a couple of your, events across the years, which is really cool.
For sure. I think the first one was a few years ago in Freehold.
Yes, a little farther down south from here. Yeah, Freehold, New Jersey, great space. Really good collaboration of different people. I met another person who's actually doing, yoga events, Eli.
Oh, Elijah.
Yeah. Very cool guy. Yes. First time I ever saw him. So a great mix of humans, just like really great stuff. That facilitation is just so great. In terms of events, I've had my handle with like running events and things like that. And that's just such a beautiful space to be in. So much collaboration kind of comes from that. And there's like a butterfly effect, I feel like.
It's amazing. It's amazing to just, as you said, like facilitating, just bringing all these unique and people from different walks of life and just all bringing them together into one space or one room and just seeing like the energy that pops off from that.
Yeah. You never know what's going to happen, especially I think that last event you did in Newark, where actually towards the end of the show, I hopped up on bass.
Yeah.
You had 2 or 3 rappers you threw down on a scythe. It was very cool.
That was awesome.
That was some cool stuff. Definitely check out the Instagrams and all that cool stuff. But yeah, so as far as, lyrics and hip hop and music, I kind of want to almost go into like, how did you find your way into music and what was the journey for you that brought you to become a lyricist, a rapper?
Absolutely. So there's definitely like a lot of stepping stones in my journey. So I'm a poet, I'm a performing spoken word poet, but I'm also a hip hop artist and MC, and they're very similarly related. However, they are also kind of 2 different worlds. So my intro into like lyricism and just like lyric writing and poetry, my grandfather was a poet and painter.
Wow.
So I guess those genes kind of have been passed down.
They do say it skips a generation, right?
And I didn't even, that's crazy. My father was not, what I mean?
No,
literally, my grandfather was, poet and painter his whole life. And my father was not, just a blue collar hard worker. And then, I guess those genes were kind of passed on.
I definitely think that there is that kind of drive for more, even with a poetic mind too. There's this kind of like interpretation. And one of those things too is like how, like to put things in words. Some people like they struggle with like, well, I don't know how to say this, or I don't know. And I got to a point where I was just such a niche, where it's such a knack for me to be like, how do I say this?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It becomes a game. It becomes really fun,
Yeah, to articulate things, because we give power to, it's like even within the Bible, like God's, naming the animals, right? Which humans do. We see things and there's no word. We put words to things to give them meaning, but things just are what they are, right?
Yeah.
So I like that you said that it's like a game, because it literally is. We're looking at something that already exists in this the physical realm and the metaphysical, and we're flapping our lips and we're calling it something, and then we all buy in, and now that's what everyone calls that thing.
And I mean, funny, it's just really by consensus that we all just decide to call it, a bird or whatever. There's that KRS-One, not to like name drop, but he talks about, like, why do you call this a bird? Right? Like, where does this word? It's not what it is.
Right. Exactly. And we just all buy in, and that's, you hear the word bird, and that's what everyone thinks of.
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated with like just the first people that created language, and that's why I'm very fascinated with like etymology and the study of words. I don't want to go off the rails too much. You also mentioned like, how did I first get into
We will revisit
itself?
That though.
Yes, let's revisit that. I could go on for days about that. I love it. But with music, so where it first kind of started, I remember I was like 13, and whatever, I'll kind of say it like it is. That's when I first kind of got into smoking a bit of bud, and I was like one of the younger kids kind of coming around the neighborhood, and like when that first happened is also like where the freestyle ciphers were happening. So it was like the two things kind of melted together. And I remember myself just kind of being in the ciphers, and at first just like really observing it and like listening to like a lot of the older heads just like spitting in the cipher. And then eventually one day I got the courage to, step in with the older cats and, kick some rhymes in the cipher off the top of the head. And I just remember feeling such a high from that, and just being able, in that creative space and just back and forth of just rhyming.
Right.
And that's what really kind of inspired me. And a lot of the people who, just about all like that initial cipher that I was in, who at the time I was so amazed by their skills and talent, I don't think any of them are still rapping or rhyming, at least seriously anymore. So from then I just really took it serious. As years went on, there was different signs for me to start taking it a bit more serious.
Again, even that like butterfly effect we're talking about, you hop in a cipher with somebody and these people, they were like, yeah, some kids here, you know what I mean? But the kind of, trajectory you ended up going on, gets influenced by these places that we end up in, these kind of, all sorts of spaces, and these rhythms too that are just innate in, specific pockets, specific communities, like how people rap here versus like on the West Coast and down south, and like the melting pot of that is really cool.
Culture and influence. It's amazing. And, I just spoke with one of the guys who I stepped in my first cipher with, and he doesn't even know it because, he's, works like, with his hands, construction. And like, that was just like when we were younger, and like, and I had to tell him like, yo, like those ciphers that we had, that literally like changed the trajectory of my life. And he was just like mind blown by it because in the moment it was, it wasn't that.
Yeah. To have a knack for words and to lyrics and all these things, again, I mean, it's interesting too, because I had a point, I was writing lyrics, but then I would go to open poetry slams and then read my things that were technically intended for lyrics, but then I'd read them at poetry spaces.
Yes.
And there's a cool crossover there too.
Yes.
And I went to this one poetry slam in Patterson. Shout out to Prototype 237.
Rashad Wright.
Right. Good shot. I got to get him on here.
Yeah.
But really great space there. And he, recently just did a huge poetry thing down in Tennessee.
Oh yeah.
They traveled down.
Shout out to New Jeru.
Yeah.
I'm actually a former member of the 2019 New Jeru Slam team. So
cool.
When I was on the team, we traveled to Fayetteville, North Carolina. But yes, big shout out to New Jeru Slam team. Who they got second place in the entire country, and that's an amazing festival and team. Like New Jersey has one of the hardest slam poetry teams.
I remember so they had an event like prior to them hitting the road, and they Rashad pulled me on and he was like, yo, be a judge. And I was like, okay. Awesome. I threw down a bass set, I did some stuff, but then I was a judge for the later portion of the event, which was like the poetry thing. And oh my God, like the hairs stand up
amazing
on end, because it's just, there's such a platform and there's such a space, being especially in our area, New Jersey, where we're kind of bordering on urban and suburban, places. It's like we kind of have a mix of just so many different cultures and so many different perspectives. And I think the diversity of what they bring to that kind of space of just like, talking about, violence that they experience, talking about their upbringing, talking about, even searching for truth and enlightenment and love, you know what I mean? And this kind of mixing of, just really emotional. And the delivery that they had was just
amazing,
absolutely wild. So, I mean, and you were a part of that.
I was a part of that.
2019.
In 2019. So shout out to the team captain, Roddy, who I'm sure you probably heard do your thing there. It's what I love about, yes, slam is just the competitive form of performative poetry, of spoken word, you know, with judges and everything. But what I love about spoken word, and even in the slam world, yes, there's heavy emotions and the hair sticks up, but I love the form because it allows you to kind of blend comedy, rap, like you could really take it anywhere you want. You know, monologues. I feel like as a writer, my creativity really became enhanced and expanded once I really started getting into the slam and spoken word world, because now you don't have to stay within a rhyme scheme.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking.
And rap has, you know, rap requires you to kind of stay within the pocket of the beat. And it's almost like you have a dance partner with the beat. Whereas with spoken word and slam, it's like it's just an open form and you could really take it anywhere you want. It doesn't have to even rhyme. Yeah. So that kind of inspired and kind of changed my writing in some ways as well. It's just amazing, you know, what's able to be created in that world. I experienced it firsthand in 2019 when I went to the Southern Fried Poetry Slam Festival, and just seeing the different techniques, and then especially when you see, you know, poets collaborating. It's different from like a hip hop song where you have like a 16-bar verse and then the hook and then the next artist jumps on. In the slam or spoken word world, when you do a group piece, you know, you'll have a few poets up at the same time, and then there's choreography involved, and it's really the next level.
That's one of the things that blew me away too, is like they had unison in how they would speak certain lines, and they would chime in and out, and then they would like utter lines together, and it was funny too, because me coming in, you know, even in my music, you know, the way I write music is very that traditional rhyme scheme. So I'm thinking coming in here, oh, it's poetry, you know, whatever. You know, because I'm more on the rock side than the hip hop side. I mean, I try to like kind of bridge in. I mean, we've done some stuff where I throw bass lines down, bass is unanimous in a lot of music. But I'm thinking, you know, these guys are going to do traditional rhyme schemes, and then it ends up being like these beautiful monologues. These like the first guy who went up was just talking about his grandmother, and he ended up making an analogy of like how his grandmother lived with like, you know, parallel something else. It was just very beautiful and very, you know, to me seemed unorthodox. So it was very cool to kind of get that, you know, just into that space. I thought it was really dope.
Absolutely. I feel like for slam and spoken word, like it has to, at least the way now that I've been exposed to like high level writing and just that world and, you know, the monologues, like everything has to be, I feel maybe it's not a pressure I put on myself, but almost to tell two stories at the same time, or tell a story but add another layer to it, like an ongoing analogy or an ongoing metaphor throughout the entire poem.
I mean, the symbolism is what kind of makes it artistic in a way. You know what I mean? It's like you're telling a story, and I feel like this happens in any sort of book. You know, and this what happens in like literary analysis and things later. It's like, you know, you read a story about, you know, what's that Hatchet book? What is
Hatchet?
that?
Funny you say Hatchet. I literally just finished that. I'm also an educator, and I finished that with my sixth graders. That was the novel that I
that's really funny.
Had both of my sixth grade classes.
Yeah, so it's like a story, right? Where this kid, he's like stuck on an island or something like that. But there's all these like
in the Canadian wilderness. Yes.
But there's all these like, you know, interesting parallels and just like symbology and like the art of survival and like all of this. I mean, you could I read that probably when I was in sixth grade. So I mean, you could probably expound a little more on that, but I just find it so interesting too, like even, you know, with literary analysis, when people start pulling something apart, and it's funny to me too, because I'm even in retrospect, I'm like, well, did the author even, you know, intend that sort of thing? Because it's like people really, you know, when you start pulling apart a piece of writing, it's like, well, look at this, and maybe he used this words or she, right, used this words and this words, and maybe they were meaning that, and it's so much inference, there's so much depth,
right,
you know, to things like that. But
absolutely, it's funny you bring that up, because I'm in the stage of my, I guess, career, you could call it like kind of blending my artistic side with my education side, and I've been working on this curriculum for quite some time, and I'm going through a lot of my poems and raps, and I'm actually doing that same process but kind of to myself, but I'm putting it through an educational comb. Right. Whereas first I was just creating these as just artistic pieces and pieces of expression. And now I'm looking at them from, okay, where are the lessons within here? What wisdom can be extracted from this? Right. And I'm looking at it from that angle. And I think mostly anything can be. done that way.
Right. And it's interesting too. I think when, you know, with younger people, with artists who are just starting out too, is a lot of like, you know, you feel a lot of chaos in your expression, and you kind of like, you dive into this and this and this. And then, you know, as you know, progress in your journey artistically, you start to realize that it's like, wow, like, you know, it becomes the path. You know what I mean? Because there's so much, I think a lot with like younger artists, we're always looking at, you know, trying to become in certain molds or whatever. Like, as you even talked about, you know, with slam, conversing that to, you know, the traditional form of hip hop, it's like, you know, do you have to fit in a rhyme scheme? And maybe you do that, maybe you do this, but, you know, where you find your niche, and, you know, because at the end of the day, music and poetry and all these things, it's just about the expression of the human form. And that can take so many different facets, you know. It just becomes really wild.
Yeah, and even the traditional rhyme schemes are being broken now. It doesn't have to be, you know, 16 bars. It's, you know, everything's becoming shorter. Even the pockets, you know, I work with I oversee a studio in Asbury Park at the Monmouth County Boys and Girls Club, and part of my role there is I do lyricism, and I do, you know, there's a studio that I kind of oversee the recording sessions and stuff. And, you know, for so much time as a teaching artist, I would always teach the structure of, okay, you know, your traditional hip hop song, there's a 16 bar verse. It'll then, you know, flow into a hook or a chorus. And then, you know, you could have a bridge, and then you go, right. And there was just this way that it was done, traditional structure, which is helpful. But now, I mean, a lot of the music coming out, that structure is just even being broken. And it's like, you know, so there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah, I think also being an artist too, it's like you want to kind of innovate. You want to do things that haven't been done before. Also to push the envelope, to push the expression, to get somewhere where the art hasn't been.
Absolutely.
You know, everyone wants to kind of do that.
And I think there's something positive about that. The first hip hop song that I ever actually like recorded and shot a music video for and published had the structure was really odd. It was, instead of like a 16 bar verse, it would be like four to 8 bars, and then I would repeat a phrase of what is your obsession. Then it would be all questions that I would ask. And I think maybe it was because it was the first song that I ever did. Maybe I was detached from that traditional structure, and I was just purely in a place of expression.
It kind of reminds me of you know, the song One Mic by Nas. Right. All I need is one mic. He raps on all I need is one, and he keeps revisiting the theme, you know, kind of drives the point home, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it's a great connection.
Do you have like specific themes that you like kind of expound on, that you go with, or do you kind of just go wherever you're
great question. So when I freestyle, I'm definitely theme focused with my writing. I think as the years have progressed. Otherwise, I'll just freestyle on and on and on, and it could go in so many directions. Right. And I feel like I don't come to this. You know, it's about the journey, not the destination. Right. But I feel like with songwriting, you want to keep it. You want to have a story, or you want to have a theme or a topic. Condensed something you're trying to drive home a point, or just so. I've definitely become more of a thematic writer, if you will. My freestyling is still pretty all over the place, but I like to keep the freestyles for all over the place. And when it comes to write, the theme and the topic is what kind of keeps me grounded and keeps me centered. And if I feel like I'm doing some poor write, like I have to look at it like, am I staying on topic? Does this bar add to the general theme? Or if we're writing essays, does it add to my thesis statement? Right. And I think having that topic, that thesis, keeps the rest of the writing and bars kind of centered. And
having a direction, I think, is really important, especially in the space of freestyling. It's like, you know, you have to have something that you're moving towards, or like a point that you're making, because otherwise, like, where are you pulling these words in? Because, you know, you could just kind of flash the rhyme scheme, right? But it's like, you know, you want to have a kind of directive. And, you know, a lot of times in the battle rap things, it's always like, you suck, I'm this, blah, blah, you know, and you have this kind of back and forth. But like when you're freestyling just off the dome in a scythe, you know, you might go off on like where you're from. You might go off on, you know, and having a particular avenue, I think, really helps just the songwriting process in general. You know what I mean? In any sort of genre, having that directive, like, okay, this is the kind of whereabouts Because otherwise it's hard to pull words out. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's very difficult if you don't have a kind of goal. And this is almost paralleling to me, like just life in general.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, what's the goal? Where are you going? And what's the point? It's like you could do all these random actions, you know, analogy for random words and random rhymes. But like, what is the trajectory? Where are you aiming? Right? Because that's what makes things hit home.
Exactly.
I feel like, you know.
How do these right. No, it was a beautiful analogy. How is this adding on to my larger goal of what it is that I'm trying to achieve? Yeah, it's beautifully said.
Yeah. Even with like the current state of hip hop, like what do you think about what's coming out now, the music that's being thrown out there now?
I think,
you digging it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, currently it's expression, like we were speaking about a bit earlier, right? I mean, it's hard to, you don't want to sound like a gatekeeper and like, this is, so I have to kind of check myself sometimes.
It's true.
From, you know, and always the generations before us were saying that their age was the best, right? So we have to kind of catch ourselves, because at times I feel that way, like about the mid 90s to early 2000s. I'm like, oh, that's the golden era of hip hop. And since then it hasn't been the same. And I still kind of feel that way. Just from a skill standpoint, I suppose, from like a writing and just creativity. But I mean, I'm sure that could be argued with, you know, from younger artists, and, you know, they have their examples of how their artists are doing things that are exceptional. And you know, in some ways I'm not listening to all the new stuff coming out, so my knowledge on it is a little limited. I just, from what I hear, I feel like most of the music sounds like poisonous, at least of what's getting through to me and what's getting picked up. I feel like a lot of the messages are just of shooting and killing and things, and which hip hop's kind of always had that direction. However, like, there's a difference. Like, I felt like with Nas, like, he would speak about you know, the hood in his area and his tough upbringing. However, he wouldn't glamorize it. He would more so be like a street journalist. Like, he would tell you what's going on. However, he's not necessarily promoting that that's the path that you should take. He's saying what's around him and the way that he's kind of maneuvering through these areas, and still keeping a high level of vocabulary and showcasing the skill in the art form. Whereas now I feel like a lot of the stuff I hear, it sounds a lot like everyone's just sounding like one another, and there's really a lack of originality.
There's a lot of emulation happening too. I mean, I think Eva, I mean, you're in the production space too. You mentioned, you know, doing
I work with a lot of producers, so I'm in that space. However, that's not my exact strength and skill set, but I work with a lot of
I do think that there is kind of an element of melodicness that's coming out of a lot of the modern hip hop. There's kind of like a melodic element to the way that they freestyle, the way that they rap. But yeah, I mean, again, with content, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you really want to start to focus. I love to look at like those dudes like Logic and like all these people, you know, who really, J. Cole, for example, who all have, you know, they're melodic, but they also, again, have kind of a message and a point to their music that I think, you know, should never be lost. You know,
absolutely. I mean, it's the duty of an artist. Like, otherwise, just specifically become a poet. Like, if you're rapping, right, it's rhythm and poetry. So you have to have the rhythm, you have to have the flow and the cadence and all these elements for it to be digestible, for people to want to hear what you have to say. So, however, though, the message is still important as well. And I believe it was like, I think it was Rakim that said, like, once the melody and the beat like took over and that was pushed to the forefront, that's when hip hop kind of started changing, in his opinion, for the worse, is when the message became less important, and the forefront became the beat.
Because then it's like,
because then you could just say whatever the hell you want.
It's interesting too, because with certain types of music listeners, you know, they just sing the lyrics. They don't really even know a lot of times like what the message of the music is, but it make the music bumps, you know, so they just bump it up, they crank it up, and they're not really necessarily conscious of what the lyrics are, you know.
And that right there is something that's like, to me, is so crucial, because I remember when I was a young, like my early high school, like I was listening to like, G-Unit and Mobb Deep and Dipset, which don't get me wrong, like Lloyd Banks, Hunger for More, like all that, which I still enjoy.
Yeah.
However, when I then like segued into listening to groups like Black Star, like Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Common, Nas, and more of like the storytellers, and even somebody like a Common who had a bit more positivity in their music, I felt like, and just artists who are consciousness of that your message is affecting a larger community, and just like the consciousness within hip hop. Once I started getting into that, I feel like it changed me as a person, because I started being a more elevated thinker.
Right.
And I think young people, especially people in general, but we're not aware how what we sing and what we're continually repeating to ourselves, because the words do hold meaning, and especially once we understand what the words are meaning. So if we like the beat, and now we're creating a mantra within our own minds, and you're rapping those lyrics, and you're repeating this mantra to yourself, and then like what you say is what you kind of embody and who you become. So the music is very powerful in leading like what kind of direction you go in life.
Yeah.
And especially for a lot of people, who don't have positive role models or influences, let's, face it, a lot of people are not being inspired by their teachers. They're just going to school because their parents tell them, and that's what it is. They're being inspired by athletes and artists and musicians.
Yeah.
So, it's not the musicians necessarily the responsibility, it's to make a living and put out entertainment, but it's, I think, when certain people aren't able to differentiate,
especially young people,
young people,
they're obviously more impressionable, things like that. But yeah, there is 100%, even with just the power of music, the sense that the just the rhythm and the tonality and those things even influence attitude. You know what I mean? Like when you're, walking down the street and you have, headphones in, and you have a certain song playing, you walk with that song, you know what I mean? And
I remember listening to, what was it, Ludacris, Move, Get Out the Way, and I listened 100%. To that in the hallways, and I felt like anybody wanted to bump into me at that moment, they could get it, or Bone Crusher, I Ain't Never Scared, and it's like, and there's different music for different emotions also, it's like, I don't want to come off like everything should be so conscious, because
100%.
sometimes you just, you don't want to be, so...
There's a certain depth of listening. It's also like even if you apply it to visual art, you know what I mean? There's things that are pleasing to the eye on the surface, but then there's other things you need to read into a bit, and I think that parallels with like lyrics.
For sure. I just think there needs to be a healthy balance.
Right.
Everyone's going to create how they want to express themselves, some on deeper levels than others. But I think the people that are publishing, like us as an audience or as the consumers, there should be that balance of what type of content, so that you could then you can make your right decision. If there's not that healthy balance and everything being thrown at you is just one specific aim of expression, now it's like you don't even have a choice. You're accepting a form of expression that maybe it wouldn't be your
this even
favorite.
Steps into the territory too of like how you're talking about being an MC, like what sort of things you bring to people and what sort of energies you bring in. I mean, if you're on a radio host or something like that, you don't want to keep it totally one-dimensional all the time. You want to kind of hop into different things. And I always say this too, it's just music in general. It's like, music is an expression of the self, and you're not the same person every day. You know what I mean? Like you go through phases, you go through these different things. But yeah, I definitely think balance is key, as you're saying, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely, man. There's different music for different emotions. That's why I try to keep a very versatile playlist, that could take me on different journeys and experiences. Because as people, I mean, even some of the most fulfilled and happy people on this earth, right? Happiness, right? Those people who feel joy often, because happiness is something that can be fleeting. But point being is that we feel a range of emotions is what makes us human. So I think a good artist or MC can take you on all these different trips 100%. Of the human experience.
Yeah, and after you turn up too, it's like, even if you're at a club, they have that slow song. Exactly, you know what I mean? Exactly. It's like, okay, all right, everybody calm down, recover, come back.
Closing time plays at the end when they want to kick you out the bar, right? So everything has its purpose, and that goes back to like the niche is like finding like, okay, and this kind of like leads into then business as well too, of like, speaking to a certain topic. Like I've now found in my catalog, and I didn't initially, and I still don't always do this intentionally, because I like to create from a place where I just feel inspired, and I like to riff off of an idea, wherever it comes from, and just take that idea down a path, and then eventually, of course, you edit and revise it so that it's concise and just as it can be like almost weaponized, not weaponized, but just have a strong impact.
Punch you in the face kind of music.
Punch in the face, you know what I mean? Or a bar, whether it's the poetry or the music.
Right.
What was the point that I was trying to get at prior to that? I just lost my thought. Oh yes, with the packaging, with the music. Like if you notice, and that goes back to what we were talking about with like thematically in business, when you have music and poems that speak to a certain topic or message or theme, or even like that song we just said, closing time at the end of the night. Now it has in life, there's every year a holiday pops back up. So that song or that poem could be relevant again.
Right.
So when you find and when you have a larger catalog and you're speaking on different topics and themes, in terms of business, it's going to, it's always going to be needed.
And be relevant.
And when they think of this thing, they're going to think of your content first. Oh, it'd be great to bring this person in and have them do something for this.
Especially when that music or that person, that artist embodies a particular thing they're looking for. I was actually, the other day I was feeling real tough and I put on Still Tippin'.
Nice.
Remember that
still
song?
Tipping on fofos.
Super big throwback, but I was just real, strong that day. But yeah, I mean, so interestingly enough, you found yourself into an educational space. You're in that literary space. This is also, what I think is really interesting too, with just artists and creative people in general. I found myself in the education space in psychology. It's like educating people about self and reality, and there's an introspective aspect to music, and that's kind of parallels with that. But you view poetry, literariness, and now getting into education as well, a beautiful sort of thing. And I feel like that's a great angle to really hit kids and be like, listen, music is literary,
Pause on ain't gonna hit kids. Nah, I get what you mean.
Yeah
no, absolutely. All jokes aside, I mean, so the way that this kind of all started, so there was a time, thinking how far I should go back, for a year, from 2015. I'll kind of skip through. I could speak a lot on that for a moment, but I was a laser science teacher for a year. And I did laser light shows all over the East Coast. Yeah, that's cool. It was lights, music, and so it required me to be a teacher, DJ, and MC, whatever. And I did large speaking engagements for the youth, but it wasn't my raps, my music, my poetry. It was a script that I would riff off of. But from there, I got the experience of speaking to large audiences of children and just feeling that scream and that hype that they would get just off the way that I could use an inflection on my voice. Even though it was a script I was using and it was lights and stuff, there's just a certain way you could say a word and
let's get it.
So, and there was an excitement there. So after I stopped doing that, I found myself in being a substitute teacher in the inner city, urban areas, Newark, Perth Amboy, Asbury Park, all over. And I found, like myself as a student, I was really kind of disinterested and oftentimes doodling, having my head down, just bored, just not really feeling like anything was really resonating with me. And so now I find myself as, at that time, not really an educator at all. Just more so at the time I was doing like, I was hosting a radio show, an underground hip hop radio show. Actually, at that time, it was on Woo World Radio, official radio station of the Wu-Tang Clan. After many years, I did it on college radio. But anyhow, who I was now wearing this role as a substitute teacher and the person of in charge in a classroom. But I was like an artist, you know what I mean? In my mind, I was still like listening to my beat, So I said to the kids, I'm like, they're all kind of rowdy and disinterested. So I said, if you guys are well behaved, you get your work done. At the end of class, I'll drop some bars for you guys. At the end of class, I'll drop some raps. And they're like, man, get the hell out of here! You ain't got no bars. I'm like, all right, just wait. So then I would start rapping for them, and they would go absolutely nuts. They would go crazy. And that's really kind of what set off now this, it's been the past about 7-8 years of arts education is kind of the route that I'm in. But yeah, it was really that moment of kind of blending the two worlds. And I remember for like before I kind of got into subbing in my early 20s, I thought for myself like, oh, I'm trying to go 100% at just being like this, successful, artist or a rapper. I always there's a thing on the side. I still always would love to make like my own TV sitcom, like a Larry David, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, but more modern day. Yeah. But maybe in my 40s I'll pick that up. I still got a whole nother decade.
You gotta get the writing.
Yes, I have some screenplays and scripts written, but I can return to that.
Yeah.
Staying on this. So there was a moment there. Hold on, I just went down that whole thing.
I think it's interesting too, even as an educator, too, to how to make yourself palatable to like just a group of kids or whatever, because I think there's a lot of times in traditional schooling there's a large disconnect between the student and the educator,
Absolutely.
So in that sense, breaking that kind of fourth wall and be like, I'll spit some bars for you, I'll do this,
right?
They're like, oh, he's like, you know what I mean? Exactly. Breaking that wall, I think, is really important and isn't talked enough about in the education space.
Absolutely. Because you're kind of meeting them at where they're at. Even though the rap that I'm experienced from and come from is a lot different from theirs. But if a bar hit, like, skill and truth is something that really can't be like avoided or denied, especially like when it's like right there in your face. So, and the thing about kids is that they will let you know right there in that moment if you are trash. You know what I mean? So it's
they
like
got no filter.
They have no filter, so they are very honest. So if you better come with it.
Yeah.
So at that moment, once I started, doing that, and I just saw the excitement and the engagement of them. Oh, the point I was gonna make is during my early 20s, I was really gonna put kind of the music to the side, because now I'm at the point where it's like, all right, I got to start making a living. You got to start making money. Yeah. And a lot of not everyone may say it, but a lot of these rappers and artists are not making a living off of their art.
It's a very small percentage.
Very small percentage
who end up actually
and
making it sustainable.
For sure, it is what it is. But once I started then kind of blending it with the education, I'm like, wow,
right
now this is something. And that's whatever you believe in, whether it's the universe, God, whatever it is that you choose to call it. I feel like that was a moment kind of in my life, and still is, where God, higher power, took me from, at the time, what was my plan A, and brought me to a much, much, much stronger plan A. That I now, as a man, I feel confident, and in this is who I am,
right,
as a person.
Because it's also you're merging worlds, especially like, because I feel like when we're younger, there's a lot of introspection into like, what am I trying to get out of the world, and where do I want to see myself, and who do I want to become? But that's one part of the equation, because there's the other part where it's like, well, what does society need you to become?
Right.
You know what I mean? Where's the need in your community? You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, it's like, we should kind of live to serve. It's like a weird idea,
I agree.
But to find your niche and to provide for your brothers and sisters, as far as what is needed in this world, and how can you elevate yourself by elevating others.
And I think that's how we find the deepest level of joy is
100%.
is by serving. Like, like, don't get me wrong, it's amazing to go on vacations and just see the beauty of the world and just experience and it's amazing to sometimes just be, right? But when we talk about our life's work in the Japanese culture, they call it ikigai.
Right.
Are you familiar with that? With all the circles, and then then they intersect at that one point.
It's like what you're good at, what they need, and something else.
Exactly. And
what pays or something.
What pays? It's all these things.
Right.
Spaces in life that we all try to.
Right. And you want to find the merger of those.
And we want to find that merger, and I feel like with the space that I'm in is bringing that all together. And I've always kind of been somewhat of a Renaissance man, where I like to do a bit of this, a bit of that. And I feel like fusing the education and the artistry allows you to go into so many different lanes, and it doesn't become boring, because you could go so many different
So now you're doing like traditional, I mean, you just talking about the hatchet and things like that. So you're working through traditional literature with these kids and going
so that was my role this past school year. Was an English language arts teacher. However, I was just offered a new position in which I would be pretty much like taking my own ideas and curriculum, and they're kind of giving me the trust to kind of come up with my excuse me.
The cool thing is too is like, you know, you want education in kind of, I think the best way to educate people is to get them learning when they don't even know they're learning.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So when they're writing their own lyrics, when they're doing all those sorts of things, it's like they're expanding their vocabulary. They're looking for what rhymes with this, what does this. And there's also, I mean, there's just, you got to be wickedly intelligent to freestyle.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, because you got to keep your mind focused. You have to, you know, pick the word that's coming out. Then you got to make that into a, you know, conscious stream where it makes sense. I mean, you got your brain
There's
has
so
to be
much
sharp.
operating at such a fast. I think of freestyling is like you're jumping off a cliff. And you're grabbing, instead of grabbing branches to make your way down, you're grabbing words. But not only are you grabbing the word, you have to make it make sense within the context of a sentence. And based off of what you just said before it. And then at supersonic speed, what is going to be the next branch that you grab or the next vine. So it's, and the only way to get better at it is just the more often that you do it. And going back to what you said, like, you know, having it be, you know, you're learning without consciously learning, right in this process. A few years ago, I had the opportunity, it was 2 summers ago, I taught at a juvenile detention center in the Bay Area. I don't want to say the specific name, in the Bay Area, and I was working with some juvies, and you know, they're all into rap and hip hop because of course it just dominates the culture nowadays. But once, you know, you really get down to it, because a lot of people are like, yeah, I rap, you know, but once you actually put them on the spot, it's like, all right, let me hear you spit. A lot of people see that it's actually much more difficult than, you know, the bar has kind of been lowered with the you know, music as it is. But if you just put,
I know you want to say mumble rap. I know you want to say it.
even a mumble is an attempt at expression, right? It's just the enunciation isn't quite there. But the point I'm getting to is that a lot of these, you know, juveniles, these young people, they realize, wow, you have to have it, because one of the rules I do when you freestyle as well is no cursing. You know, because cursing is a crutch. At first, you can.
It's also
if
a
you
word filler.
It is. It's
just extra adjectives.
Exactly.
F and this, F and that.
It's a filler. When you can't think of something to say, you throw a curse because it's a filler, right?
Right.
So realizing that is like, wow, I actually have to be somewhat learned. I need to expand my vocabulary. I need to know more words so that they could rhyme with this. And you see that you actually have to have a pretty good grasp on language in order to rap.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Marv, is that time accurate? Well, we got 10 minutes? 5? Okay, cool. So that brought you essentially into the nonprofit space, like getting into education, getting into all these things. So you want to maybe talk a little bit about that nonprofit stuff?
Sure. So I ended up meeting, there was like a lot of stepping stones from first being like a rapping substitute teacher. And then eventually I got picked up. I started working with NJPAC, New Jersey Performing Arts Center.
Awesome.
And then, you know, different organizations. But in 2018, I made the decision to start my own brand and business. So I started my own sole proprietorship called MysterE Edutainment, which is a business that I still operate under, doing school assemblies, workshops, working with many different nonprofits. So I still do that. And in 2019, when I was a student at Kane University, I actually competed in a business plan competition in which I made it as a finalist and you know, won like $900, and it was at my college, so that was pretty cool. But in recent years now, in addition to my own business, MysterE Edutainment, I partner with a few different nonprofit organizations. One down in Asbury Park called the Asbury Park Music Foundation, who's also partnered with Lake House Recording Studios, and that's where I run the studio with the Monmouth County Boys and Girls Club. So that's that. But then I'm also very involved now with another nonprofit called Rappers and Rabbis, which meets at the intersection of Judaism and hip hop. Which I am, you know, ancestrally, my heritage is Jewish. However, I wasn't raised very Jewish, but now that I met with the Rappers and Rabbis guys, I've been kind of like returning and you know, learning some of the Jewish wisdom, which has been pretty cool.
It's a really cool way, also just music in general, being such a communal space, you know what I mean? You can bring it into so many different elements, you know?
It's amazing. So yeah, the work that I've been able to do with Rappers and Rabbis has been quite amazing. You know, allowed me some different traveling opportunities. I'm actually the New Jersey regional director for Rappers and Rabbis. So last year I hosted a total of 3 retreats in the Pocono Mountains, and they were like songwriter retreats. But we also had a rabbi there who would, speak different parts of the Torah, and we would learn, the different artists would learn these pieces from the Torah, and then we would recreate that into songs. And there's one other experience I'll mention, is thus far in my career is probably one of my highlights. Last year I did my first international tour with an organization called Next Level USA, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, Meridian International Center, and U.S. Chapel Hill in North Carolina, in which I toured Poland as a U.S. hip-hop cultural ambassador.
Wow.
So hip-hop in of itself, right? It's a musical art form, but it's also a culture, with the different elements of DJing, MCing, B-boy, graffiti art, and the knowledge of self. So I went there as a hip-hop MC with a group of other American hip-hop artists, educators in Poland. So that was quite incredible. I know I dropped a lot on you, these different organizations.
So where can people find you like nowadays? I mean, I know you're still running events, you're still running things like that, right?
Yeah, well, you can follow me. I know Instagram is one of you popular things, so you can definitely follow me on Instagram. It's at MysterE.
We'll have the link in the description, so people will be able to click away real easy. But I think also I'll try to drop that video of us on the Scythe. Me on bass, my guy here doing some stuff. So I'll drop the link of that. Check that video out as well.
And shout outs you, sir, Dan, you're a great guitarist yourself. Yeah, have a lot of fun jamming. And, I think there's a lot that we could relate on just there as far as you being a professor and an educator, but also you being a musician. Right. And I think, music really requires you to be at a high level.
Right.
To be
a lot of creativity, a lot of introspection. You have to have a message. My thing was always like, if I'm going to get on stage, I got to say something. Right. So having that kind of element too. But yeah, I mean, even just the physics of music, which is really crazy, because then you get to talk about signal processing and effect sounds and all that stuff. And, it gets into just reality itself, even how it affects
and how it affects your moods, body, emotions, your heart, right? Our heart has a BPM, right?
100%,
our heart
100%.
has a constant beat, so it's like you can't escape it.
People say I don't got rhythm. I'm like, your heart beats, you move your feet,
exactly,
you got it,
exactly.
All right, guys, check those links in the description. It's been a fast hour here, but MysterE, big man on campus over here. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, my brother. It's been a pleasure.
We're out.